easy for you now. You got 2 minutes of my time, and I don't really break too easily, but I'm worth it, 'cause I'll slip into your dreams tonight. Oh, so give me your all. I'll take it to Mars. Oh, I'll stick like glue inside your mind. Just watch me breaking. You'll swear you're falling into me. Touch me. I swear you'll do anything.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thank you so much for tuning in yet to another episode of Unscripted, where we actually have conversations that matter. We're not afraid to go there. We're not afraid to have these hard conversations, because in life, those hard moments really push us forward. So we're going to have those conversations. And today, joining me is the beautiful Shannon L. Felder. But before I really allow her to jump into it, imagine if you actually had a way, like the necessary tools to resolve conflict, to avoid getting into conflict, to manage your mental health during that conflict. On today's show, we are actually going to give you the necessary tips, tools, and tricks to doing all of that. Now, it's going to take work for you to actually go in and make sure that you take a moment to pause and follow all the necessary steps that we're going to actually give to you during this show. So, Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate you bringing on and taking a moment to share with the listening audience a little bit about you.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I am so honored and so privileged to be here and to serve as a conflict manager, conflict coach. So I love what I do. I pretty much take my 20 years of experience as an attorney and as a pastor's wife and as a minister of the gospel myself. And I use those to help people resolve disputes. I use it to help people manage existing conflict and to find their conflict confidence, to know how to approach conflict without being insecure, without being scared, without feeling like you're ill-equipped to handle it. And I help organizations with healthy conflict culture. So an environment where conflict can be used as a tool for growth and expansion instead of division.
I love it. I love it, because I think that if people have the necessary tools, for me, it wasn't until I really got heavy into the Word of God. It wasn't until I really decided that I wanted to do something different. You know, I was tired of arguing. I was tired of getting into situations where I felt like I had to defend myself all the time. And every time somebody said something about me, I had to defend it. And, you know, previously being married twice, being a single mother, like I was always fighting for my voice not to be stolen away from me. And in that caused a lot of arguments because I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't have the right tools. So we are actually going to talk to not only the married couples today, because both of us are married, but we're also going to talk to the singles. And I know that you actually had said something a little bit earlier when we were talking about it, and actually it's actually in your bio, about not allowing conflict in your personal life to occupy your space and your thoughts while you're trying to achieve your goals. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So a lot of times what happens is we have gotten in an argument, we've gotten in a fight, and we are replaying it over and over in our head, or we're at a place of disagreement with someone. And so because we're in a situation where we're in disagreement, we are thinking so much about when I talk to them, this is what I'm going to say, or this is what I'm going to do. And it can actually become a distraction. It can become a distraction from the things that God has for you. It can become a distraction from the goals that you're supposed to be pursuing. And so when you know how to address a conflict without, it going to an argument and without all the emotions, right? Because a lot of times we say things to hurt one another. We do things with a negative intent, and then we leave the conversation wounded. And so we have to deal with that wound. And so it just takes up so much of your thought space. And that's something that you need to be focusing on other things instead of focusing on and arguments and things like that. And we've all been there, right? Where something happened and you couldn't even think straight, right? So,
oh my goodness.
Definitely.
Yeah. I was sharing with you, I'm going to be very transparent. That's just how I am. I'm very transparent. The other day, my son, he's getting to that age where he's feeling himself a little bit. My children are very vocal. I wonder who they get that from, right? So they're extremely vocal. And I always say it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. It's how you present it. You're entitled to feel and think how you want to think, but it's all in how you present it to the other person. And so they're still trying to learn that part of it. A lot of times it does come off extremely rude and extremely abrasive. And so my husband, being the first real man in their life, my son is 15. My husband's really been in his life the last 3 years straight. They've been bumping heads, and so it puts me in the middle, and I have to take a moment to breathe. I have to take a moment to go to God in prayer. That's just my walk. That's how I have to handle it, because I never want to say, I've gotten to the age now where I don't want to say the wrong things. The one thing I learned in past arguments, either that I've seen from other people or that I've seen just from myself, is that sometimes you can say that thing, and once it's said, no matter how many times you apologize about it, somewhere deep inside, it may still have wounded that person, and they may still be holding on to it. So in that situation that I was sharing with you, I'm going to just throw that scenario out for somebody who may actually be dealing with that, where they're, in a sense, not put between their husband and their child, but they're in the middle regardless. How do they handle that conflict? How would they even address that conflict?
So I think the first thing that helps in that situation is for everyone to have clearly identified roles and for there to be consistency. I know that's one of the issues that comes up a lot when you have blended families, right? Because everyone is trying to figure out exactly where do I fit in? How do I fit in? So for example, your husband is in this role in your situation where he is not the father, but he is the male influence in your son's life. And so that is a line that has to be balanced. And, that's difficult. And then, as you said, given the history, your son comes into the situation with some guards, with some defenses, right? With not wanting to necessarily receive another person as the father figure. Also, there's some most likely feelings of being protective of the relationship with a biological father. There's some being protective of just himself, right? And his own identity. Of course, we all know adolescence is a unique and trying time. As you said, in adolescence, a lot of times our children are using their voice, but they're also finding their voice, right? So sometimes it's difficult to even articulate what they feel or how they feel, because sometimes they're not sure themselves. So I think that number one, you want to have some clearly defined roles. I would also say, relationships are built outside the context of conflict, right? Mm-hmm. A strong relationship can withstand conflict and understand that this is coming from a healthy place, right? So I would say, one of the things that you want to make sure occurs is that there is relationship development when there's not a disagreement, when there's not an argument, because that bond will lend itself to a healthier conflict approach. And like you said, of course, for someone in your position, like you said, you got to be prayerful. A lot of communication has to occur. You and your husband have to be on the same page. It can't be a situation where there's a lot of, kind of like, what just happened? Like, we never talked about, this situation,
Right.
or, things of that nature. So I think those are three keys, that would definitely
Yeah.
be helpful in a situation like that. And then one of the things that that I always encourage people to do is what I call the autopsy of a bad conversation, right? So whenever it turns to an argument, whenever something goes the wrong way, like, let's actually, like, even when it's resolved, even when we've moved on and the situation is kind of dead, we need to go back and we need to look at what went wrong so that we can be proactive from now on and making sure that we don't go in that direction.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that you said, which I always say, and we talk about this often, is you have to have a relationship. And this doesn't just go for blended families. This just goes for people in general. There has to be
Absolutely.
a foundation of love, a foundation of support ahead of time. So that way, when that issue does arise and when the issue does come up, they know that it's coming from a loving place. Like it has to be more than just the conflict. And I think that even in relationships, so talking to the person that's dating, 'cause we can back up, go to them really quick. The person that's
Sure.
dating, or the person that is single and just kind of, maybe they're thinking about dating or they're thinking about commitment. Really, you have to know where your guidelines, for me, those non-negotiables
Sure.
are. And
Right.
then have those hard conversations before the conflict actually arises.
Right.
Talk about those things. So actually, in bringing that up, I know that you have a book on or a downloadable file on your website, talking about mapping out the tools for the tough talks. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So on my website, I actually have, like you said, a downloadable tool, and it goes into helping you to map out tough conversations. A lot of times we go into conversations, and my experience as I deal with people is they'll go into the conversation and they'll be like, we need to address issue A. And they walk into the conversation, and all of a sudden, it's almost like just an explosion happens. And before you know it, they have talked about B through Z. And when they get out of it, they never even got to A. So they left the conversation. Now we have hurt feelings. We have a whole bunch of emotions. We had a full-on fight. And at the end of the day, we didn't even resolve the issue. And so the mapping tool that I have is actually designed to help you think through the conversation before you have it. It actually gives you what you need to actually write out, like your opening paragraph. And it's not that you go there and you read it, but to actually thought through, this is how I'm going to start this conversation, and to really be able to focus on making sure you accomplish the goals of the conversation, making sure that that you've kind of weeded out the things that are present in your heart, present in your thinking, aren't necessarily related to the conversation. Because that's what happens, right? Whenever we have to have a tough conversation, number one, most times we have it on the fly. We just kind of go straight in with no thought, with no preparation, with no heart check. It's on my mind, it's out my mouth. And then when we get there, what happens is we just have an explosion of emotion. We really don't tackle the issue. Now, of course, you do have to address the emotion, but I know a lot of times we process emotion while we talk, and that doesn't work well because, just to give you an example, even in my marriage, sometimes if my husband and I disagree, I'll say, okay, I'm not ready to talk about it right now, because sometimes, and we all have kind of our, what I call default conflict persona. And what I mean by that is, if you are by nature kind of, defensive and a fighter, then that's going to be your default response, right? But that may not be your real emotion. Your real emotion may be hurt. And so if I'm fighting you, but my root emotion is I'm hurt, then because I'm hurt and I'm a fighter, when I go in that way, my goal is to hurt you back.
And even so subconsciously, it may not be that you're doing it intentionally. It's just your reaction, because if that's all you know and you've never done anything different, or if it's a new realm for you where you're opening up those hard conversations and you're sticking in there and you're not walking away, you have to understand, allow yourself room to process, what you think or how you feel. Like, take a moment and pause. So I want you guys to go in and download her mapping tools for tough talks. And funny enough that you brought that up, because I didn't know that ahead of time. Actually, I think that we did slightly mention it, because I actually wrote a book called Don't Let the I Do Become the I Don't. And so it gives all of these different types of conversations that you can possibly have. My husband and I went through that book probably around the time where we had first gotten married, and this is both of our third marriage. So we wanted to make sure that we had those conversations ahead of time, just to kind of get an idea, perspective on what do you think about this, or how do you feel about this situation? And people have to understand that although the tools that we're giving them may work today, if they're with that same person 5 years later, they need to go back and revisit some of those same conversations, because your ideas, your thoughts, your feelings, just life in general will cause you to change the way you see or view something, as well. Something else that you said, and we want to go ahead and put that out there for the people that are dating and even the people that are married, that compatibility requires authenticity. And you brought that up. So I want you to expound on that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So a lot of times when we are dating, we like to kind of impress the other person. And, of course you want to put, your best foot forward. I'm not knocking that. But what happens is we spend so much time trying to impress the other person, trying to stay, in that person's good graces, that sometimes we're not authentic to who we are. Like, it's absolutely amazing that you're talking about having those difficult conversations, even in a dating context, because the one of the things that we're doing when we're dating is we're getting to know one another to determine whether or not we're compatible. But if you're not bringing the true you to the table, then my decision making is going to be flawed, because you're saying things that really aren't true to who you are. And so what ends up happening is, over time, we begin to actually resent not being our true selves, and we begin to resent the person. But that person, and that's what you see happening, especially in the early stages of marriage, right? So you've got one person saying, this is not who I thought I was marrying. And then you've got this other person who's like, you're trying to make me be who I'm not. Well, that's kind of who you presented yourself as during the dating process. And so, we have to be authentic in order to determine compatibility, because if not, you're just creating so much conflict as the relationship progresses. I would also say, on the other side of that, even when you study, and I am not a scientist, and that is not my strong area, but even when you study how we see things, when you study vision, like when we see things, we don't necessarily see everything. We fill in the blanks. Like, our visual field kind of sees the image, and then we fill in the blanks. We do that a lot in relationships as well. So what we do is we come in and we see, like, we have this picture of a person, how they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be. And whenever we see this outline of a person, right, we just met them, all of a sudden it's like we fill in the blanks, like, yes, this is it. But then over time, you get to see the reality. And it's almost like you get mad at the person for not being what you envisioned, but they never presented themselves that way. So we really have to manage our expectations. You know, I often say, that my husband is 100% my knight in shining armor, but listen, let's take the armor off when they get home. So, so yes, it does not diminish the fact that he's my knight in shining armor, but what I live with is not going to be the most polished, most, majestic version of himself. And that's what I'm here for. I am here for him not to have to be perfect, for him not to have to be so polished. I want him to be safe and being vulnerable with me, because I know you. And I've already made the decision to love you and to accept you. And so we can have tough conversations. You can talk about things that you may not feel comfortable talking other places about.
Absolutely. I think that, it's we say some of the same things. I always tell people, fire your representative. I don't want to see your representative. I need you to fire them from jump. Show me your flaws and all. Actually, Beyonce, I think, has the song Flaws and All. And I used to love that song because I want to show you, like, I'm going to tell you up front, these are my flaws. This is what you're going to get. These are the things that I like. These are the things that I don't like. And I think it's so healthy in the beginning to not, you want, like you said, you want to put your best foot forward, but you also want to be very true to yourself. So that means firing your representative. If you don't like something, say in the beginning that you don't like it. So many people, I think, they want to have the marriage. They don't want to be married. In that in itself takes a lot. So you put on this persona of being perfect, or like you said, the TV romance type of look, in a sense, and that's not reality. That's why so many people are ending in divorce. That's why you see so many arguments happen as well. So we actually touched on a few things. We talked about compatibility requires authenticity. Something else that you brought up, which I think that a lot of people deal with it, but they don't acknowledge the fact that they are dealing with it or have dealt with it, which is trauma, right? How trauma really, in a sense, changes you. And it doesn't mean that you had this life-altering, something where somebody came in and your whole world was flipped. Everybody's trauma looks different, just like everybody grieves differently. So don't minimize something that is actually traumatic to you. So I do kind of want to touch on that a little bit as well, that understanding and recognizing that trauma actually has triggers. For me, being in past relationships that were domestically violent, as well, I have certain triggers. Although I felt like I've dealt with them, there are certain triggers, certain words, especially, or certain actions. If somebody jumps at me too quick, I'm reacting to it. I have triggers that are actually embedded in me and who I am right now. And unfortunately, a new person doesn't know that they're there unless they poke that side of the bear, and causes that trigger to erupt, because a lot of times you think you are over something, or you've totally healed from it, and then boom, something happens, and now you're reacting to it in the same manner that you would have reacted to it when it first happened. So let's, I want you to talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So when I say trauma brings triggers, whenever something has happened in your life, like you said, we're not talking about whether it's major or, just completely, destroyed your world. Any type of trauma will bring with it a trigger. So we are designed not to want to experience pain. We are designed not to want to hurt. And so if you went down a path in the past, and in that path you became hurt, anytime you start going down a path and it feels familiar, or it looks familiar, then you immediately begin to guard against that experience that you had before.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, then it can cause you to have triggers. Like you said, we all have them, right? But the key is to be self-aware and to know that you have them. So I'll give you an example that I dealt with a client in a workplace. Okay, so there was a male supervisor and there was a female team member, and they had, I mean, a knockdown, drag out fight, like to the extent where they refused to sit beside each other in meetings, just the whole, like it was bad. And so as we began to deal with it, and I started dealing with each individual, the female team member basically recognized as we talked that at the root of this, there was an actual conflict, right? There was a disagreement. But the reason that it had gone to such an explosive level was because it triggered something traumatic in her. She had been in a situation where I believe it was her father had been abusive towards her. And in the context of their disagreement, the tone of something that the male boss had said sounded to her like her father. And so it triggered in her self-protect. You will never go through that again. You will never be abused like that again. And so she blew up at him in response and then refused to be close proximity to him, because even though she was dealing with her boss, she was protecting herself like she was dealing with her father.
Right. Right.
So that trauma that she experienced triggered her in a workplace situation. And so when we talk, especially when we talk about family environments, when we talk about marital environments, you have to know what your triggers are. And as you become more comfortable with that other person that you're in the relationship with, you have to let them know, hey, listen, this is a trigger for me. I remember in the early stages of my marriage, I was in a relationship prior to my marriage where whenever the person wanted me to not be as opinionated as I am, because I'm very opinionated. Whenever that person did not want me to be opinionated, whenever that person did not want me to speak my mind, they would accuse me of being quote unquote controlling. And that was not my intention. That was not my presentation. In fact, the accusation that I was controlling was being used by this person as a method to control me. Like, I'm going to accuse you of being controlling so that you back down, and then I can control the narrative of this whole situation. And so calling me controlling became a trigger for me. Like, if you did that, then that made me go all the way out. And so I had that conversation with my husband, like, listen, you can't, I know I'm opinionated. I know I'm strong-willed, got it. I know that. But don't call me controlling, because that's a trigger for me. Now, if you feel as if I'm being controlling in this situation, then you might say, like, I feel like, you're being, kind of bossy, or you're trying to tell me what to do, because it's not the concept that I have a problem with. It was the word controlling that was a trigger for me based on my past experience. And so I communicated that. And there are times when I probably feel bossier than I need to be. And he said so, but he's been very diligent not to basically say, oh, you are so controlling. Like, he's never said that to me, because he knows that's one of my triggers, and over the course of our relationship, he shared his triggers with me. And so that is a part of intimacy. Yes. And I was going to kind of along those lines say, that is one of the things that stops us from being authentic, and it stops us from actually determining our compatibility and growing in intimacy in relationships, is we fear vulnerability. We don't want to be vulnerable, but everyone has vulnerabilities, and that is actually how you grow in your relationships. You know, like you were saying, don't send your representative. You've got to be the authentic you. You know, I'll even use a workplace example, right? We go into a workplace and they're like, so do you know such and such computer program? And you're like, well, I'm not an expert, but I am familiar with it. And you don't know anything about this program, right? So now you're at home, you're burning the midnight oil, you're trying to learn this program because you just weren't vulnerable enough to say, hey, no, I'm not familiar with that program, but if I'm a quick learner, can you tell me where to get the resources? And so because we didn't want to be vulnerable, we actually created stress, right? Because what I see is you didn't know the program, you've been working like a dog behind the scenes trying to learn the program. And so then you feel like your work is not being appreciated because you're spending all this time, but they don't know you're spending all this time because you told them you knew the program.
Right.
So that lack of authenticity has put you in this condition where you're overwhelmed and overworked and feeling unappreciated. So, you know, being authentic, you know, I told my husband I wasn't a good cook before we got married. I told him I don't cook soul food. You know, so there were no surprises, right? So, so, you know, he never sat down and was like, what in the world, you know, because he knew from day one that wasn't my greatest skill set, and that if it was a skill that we needed to develop, it was going to be a learning process for me. And, you know, I was very upfront, like, of all the things on my list to do in life, like learning how to be an excellent cook is not at the top of my list. So, so that was known, right? And you have to do that. But you know, how many of us when we're dating, we go have someone else cook, we put it in our pots, right? We act like we did it, just not being authentic.
Yeah, but I also think that you have to know who you're being authentic with and vulnerable with, because some people can. My husband and I had this conversation where, you know, in the past he was vulnerable, and then the person turned around and used it against them. So we're not saying that every person that you meet, you need to be completely open, transparent, honest, like, look, this is what you're getting. But if it's a person that you feel like this could go the long haul, and that really comes with also knowing yourself. Like, you have to know yourself, and if you're giving your all and you're being authentic in it, and you are receiving the same thing, then you can make the best decision for not just yourself, but for you. Because just because you're a good person, it does not mean that that person is meant for you. You can be good people, and maybe you just need to be good people as friends, but you're not going to know that if your representative is showing up. So it's important that you are who you truly are. Don't ignore the red flags, because there's always going to be some type of red flags, and we'll be like, oh, it's not, you know, he's not really like that, or she's not really like that, you know, and it's just a one-off type of situation. People show you who they really are, and it's up to you to just kind of watch and really truly see who they are. If someone is selfish, there are going to be some tendencies to show you that they're also selfish. If they are self-righteous, if they are controlling, if they are all of these different things, somewhere down the line it's going to show up. But if it does, it's okay to ask that question, like, what was that about? Or why did you react that way? Or what caused that to happen? Because in asking those questions, instead of ignoring it, it will help you to have more understanding as to who they are, what their triggers are, because maybe something happened that just triggered that reaction, right? As well. So we want to kind of leave you with some. You want to say something on that?
Yeah, I did. I know when you and I were talking earlier, I kind of referenced one of my favorite scriptures out of James, and it's in James, the first chapter, and it says that you have to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And that goes along with what you're saying, like even in the dating context, when you said, you know, you just don't, you know, just be vulnerable with someone, you know, the day you meet them. A lot of times, you know, that's what we do. We go to either end of the spectrum when we need to be balanced in the middle, right? So When I first meet you, it's not like, here are all my triggers and here are all my traumas and here's all,
Right.
no, because if you notice, you're doing all the talking. Like, you need to be listening, right? Getting to know the other person so that you can, gradually, reveal who you are. I like to use in the Bible when it talks about Esther, right? Esther had to go through this long process before she got to be revealed to the king. And so a lot of times what we want to do is we want to process in the presence of our king, when sometimes you need to be processing in private so that you can come and you can reveal who you are to that other person. And so yes, we have to be slow to speak and slow to get angry. And it amazes me because that's one of my like staple conflict scriptures, because most of us do it the exact opposite, right? We're quick to talk and quick to get angry and slow to listen. And even when we look like we're listening, we're really just planning attack B. We're really
Exactly.
not even listening to what you're saying. So yeah, so we have to learn how to listen. Like you said, people tell us who they are, but sometimes we're not listening. Like you said,
Absolutely.
it's going to show up. It's going to show up, and a lot of times when I'm dealing with people in marital conflict, they'll say, like you said, all these red flags were there before we got married, but I ignored them. Like, no, when someone shows you who they are, you have to believe them and you have to determine whether or not you could accept them for who they are.
Absolutely. I think that's so good. So we want to leave you guys with a few tips that we've come up with, just a few tools. And you have to put them into practice in order for them to work. If you don't put them into practice, they're not going to work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put up a few tips that we did. But before we did that, there was another scripture that I had found, and a soft answer turns away wrath, right?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
you do want to get into your emotions. You do want to get into saying how it made you feel or saying how it hurt you. But sometimes just taking a moment and pausing in that will give you a moment to
Right.
not just blurt out something that you're not going to be able to take back. Because once you say the words, I don't care how many apologies, I don't care even if you don't apologize, you don't know how words, the tongue is a two-edged sword. So
Right.
you can either love them with it or you're going to kill them with it, especially when you're in your emotions. And I think one that we both agree on, which I put up on another show, was seek first the kingdom of God. And that means in all things, in all areas, you have to go present it before God, and I think that sometimes if you say, stop, let me pray on this thing, let me not deal with it in the moment, because there's so much emotion around what may be happening, it may seem like you're brushing the other person off, and that's really not the case. Like,
Right.
let God lead you in the direction in which you need to go, they need to go. Sometimes you can't do anything and just let God deal with it, right? Because if you step ahead of God, you're going to do the wrong thing. You're going to say the wrong thing. Your actions are going to be wrong. Your thoughts, and one thing we didn't talk about really was your thoughts. You got to be watchful of your thoughts in that midst of being angry. Um,
Yes.
your thoughts tend to come into actions. If you're saying, I can't stand this, I hate this, I'm over this, I don't need this,
Right.
in the midst of if you're thinking those things, your actions are going to show that. And then when it really happens, you're going to be left looking like, wow, I didn't really mean that. I wish I could go back and change that. And then
Right.
if that's the last thing that you're thinking, and then God forbid that person is taken from your life tomorrow, is that really going to be how you felt? For me, that's what I try and think of. Like, I don't want to, our thoughts can all get the best of us. I could speak for myself. I know that my thoughts sometimes get the best of me, and then I have to put a prayer out, but like, okay, God, I need you to fix it, or I need you to change it because I don't like the way I'm thinking. I don't like the way I'm feeling. And so with that being said, here's tip number 1, check your heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to check your heart. As you were saying, I like to teach people that we have to divide, what's going through our headspace. Okay. Because you can have an emotion going through, you can have an imagination going through, or you can have a fact, right? And so, facts tend to be consistent. Emotions tend to change, right? Because you can be mad at someone and, love them. I always use the example comically, in my practice, I deal with family law. And so I've had the occasion to have been a part of some child support disputes, right? And so it's always amazing to me, like, the person that you were so in love with enough to have this child, like, you completely hate this person, like, today, like, put him in jail. I don't care. Get me my money for my kids, and of course, support is justified. But I'm always intrigued by how varied the emotions are. I'm like 2 years ago, you completely had a baby with this person and you were all in love. And now, emotions change, right? And then you have imaginations. Like you said, your thoughts will just start and they'll just keep going, right? And they'll just keep going, which is why the Bible tells us to cast down imaginations and anything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, because we play situations out in our mind, right? So he said that he didn't like my dress, which means he really doesn't like the way I look, which means he really isn't attracted to me, which means he's probably attracted to somebody else, which means he's cheating on me. Like,
Right.
We have played out this whole narrative in our mind,
Right.
that has no basis in reality, right? So, you got to cast down the imaginations. When it comes to checking your heart, what that deals with is, identifying what you have going on emotionally, right? Because sometimes we have stuff going on that is not godly, that is not productive, and it sneaks in your heart, right? Pride sneaks in your heart very stealthily and very quietly. And so a lot of times the basis of our conflict is not really what the person said or what the person did. It's that we have some level of embarrassment, we have some level of shame attached, and now pride has kicked in, and we're trying to recover our reputation. It's not even about issues. So you got to watch out for pride. You have to watch out for bitterness, right? Are you bitter from some past experiences and now you're speaking from that place? There's a laundry list of emotions, and you have to check your heart and make sure, because the Bible says out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth. So if I get my heart right, my mouth is going to be okay. Right. But it's all that stuff that's in my heart that I need to check and I need to deal with in order for me to have a productive conversation instead of me having argument and division.
Absolutely. And then another tip that we want to leave you with is take a moment to breathe.
Right.
A lot of times when you're in your emotion, your heart speeds up. Now you're feeling all shaky. You're feeling all anxious. You're feeling like, I got to get it out. I got to get it out. But if you take a moment to just take a breath, take some deep breaths, it'll actually slow your heart rate. And it'll give you a moment to just reflect on that, what just happened. Right.
Right.
So with that also being said, we want to also say to listen twice and speak once.
Right.
Listen. And we've spoken about this over a period of time on this show today, about listening. It's important. And if you're not sure that you understand what was just said, it's okay to say, did you just say, or I just heard you say, and is this what you meant? It's hard to do in the midst of being emotional. It is, because you're in your feelings, but that's when we're going to go back to saying, take a moment to breathe, check your heart, and then let's go ahead and talk about that. Something else that I want to leave you guys with is, if you're talking about A, B, and C, deal with A, B, and C.
ABC, absolutely. Right.
You know, I think a lot of times people tend to, oh, well, you hurt my feelings in this, and this is what I want to bring up. And then the person comes back and says, well, 3 weeks ago, you did this. And you're like,
Right.
that was 3 weeks ago. Like, why are we, I'm trying to, because it makes you feel like your feelings aren't validated in that moment. So deal with A, B, and C.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and then you're in a situation where you are in combat and not resolution mode. It's almost like you did ABC to me. Well, you did DEF to me, and now we're just volume fighting. We're not resolving conflict.
Right.
So yeah.
So that's important. And then the last tip that we want to go ahead and leave you with is holding on to things will cause you to erupt. And this even goes back to the very beginning that we both said about being vulnerable with the right person, but also you have to be a safe space for that person to land. If they're going to be vulnerable, you can't take digs at them in that moment of being vulnerable, but holding on to things, especially for too long, will cause you to erupt. So do you want to go ahead and expound on that a little bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because here's the thing about it. We are not designed to house disagreement, right? So what happens is a disagreement is basically where there is, the Bible says you can't walk together unless you're agreed, right? Well, when you don't address issues, you actually have disagreement inside yourself. So you're tearing yourself apart. You know, when you hold things in, it causes an eruption, right? For some people, it causes eruptions like you were talking about earlier, where when you finally do have a conversation, you can't deal with ABC because you've been holding on to 𝒫𝓁𝑒𝒶𝓈𝑒. And so the moment you open your mouth, all of that just comes whooshing out, right? So that's one manifestation of it. But it also, when you hold things in, it causes eruptions in your physical well-being, right? Your blood pressure goes up. You know, like you said, your heart rate elevates. It can cause you to have pain. You know, when you look at the word disease, it's dis-ease, when you are not at ease. And so you literally are opening the door for so many manifestations when you don't have those conversations. And, you know, when you were talking earlier about breathing deeply, I wanted to kind of connect this. We all have a response to any time we perceive a threat, right? You can study psychology and it'll show you we either have fight, flight, freeze, right? Those are your responses. And whatever your kind of default response is, whenever you perceive a threat, your hormones, every bodily system begins to gear itself up for that response. And so for some of us, you know, when you don't actually address it, then it can't help but to erupt, because it's not just your mind, your adrenaline. I mean, your body is ready to respond. Your body, your mind, your soul, everything is ready to go in. And so we really have to not hold it in. We have to address it. And sometimes breathing deeply, one of the things that it does, because I wanted to connect that, is breathing deeply also, it takes you out of feeling threatened. Because when you breathe deeply, your body's like, wait a minute, we had time to take a deep breath. Maybe we're not in danger. Maybe there isn't a threat. So maybe I don't need to send all the adrenaline and do everything that needs to happen in order for me to get ready to fight or to run. So that deep breath, it's psychological, but it's also biological. And it's a huge thing that we need to do. And I even say, don't just breathe deeply whenever something happens. Breathe deeply while you're listening, right? Really take it in, because like I said, a lot of us, when we say we're listening, we're planning our next response. We're really not hearing what the person is saying in order to really absorb it into our hearts.
That's so true. That's so true. I think it's been an awesome conversation today. I'm sure that this is probably not going to be the last time that we need to have this conversation, because as you grow and as you learn and as you evolve and as you date and as you marry, conflicts are going to come up, and sometimes you need somebody to just hit the nail on the head in that one conflict and really get an answer. Also, it's okay to seek help and seek guidance if you don't know how to resolve it. If you are married, hopefully that person is your best friend. And hopefully that person is only wanting the best for you, for your family. But sometimes you do need a mediator. Sometimes you do need someone to kind of go in, help you, even if it's a one-off. It can just be a one-time situation, someone who doesn't know the ins and outs of your marriage. It's okay to seek that help. It's okay to say, we're not going to be able to handle this. We need to look for outside help. And then I would say pray on it and then ask God to bring in the right person that's going to be able to assist you. Clearly, both of us on here are able to do that in our own lives. Sometimes we have to step outside and get that outside help. So it's not just like, oh, everybody's so perfect. No relationship is perfect. You're going to have the ups and downs. And if you aren't having some type of not argument, but disagreement where everybody is just, oh yes, everything is perfect, everything. You might be dating or married to that representative. So I'm not sure, but Shannon, do you have any final closing thoughts before we leave? Anything you want to leave them with?
I would just say, like you just said, it's really important that sometimes you do reach out for outside help. Don't try to do everything on your own. Don't sit up miserable in conflict in any area of your life. And Coach Shay said, that's what we do. I actually do what I call confrontation. One of the things I love doing is I do confrontation coaching. So people can actually reach out to me and say, I have to confront someone about ABC. And I kind of walk them through that. And just on an ongoing basis, I love helping people develop their conflict confidence, to know who you are so that you can have difficult conversations and things like that. And the last thing I really wanted to say is, how you said if someone agrees with everything, you're probably dealing with their representative. You got to get to a place where you invite healthy conflict, because God made all of us different. We're not the same. In a marriage, for example, the fact that my husband and I don't agree on everything has made our lives better, because we've experienced things that we wouldn't have thought about. Our children have been exposed to things that they wouldn't have been exposed to if everything was just, yes, I agree with you. Then we never would have gotten to the best. And so, we got to understand God made us different because he wants us to benefit from our differences. So embrace healthy conflict. It doesn't have to be nasty. It doesn't have to be an argument. It can absolutely be us coming together to talk about differences of opinion and coming out with the best possible product.
Right. Because really in a marriage, you have to learn to compromise. You may not always get things his way or your way. Compromising really is healthy because it's a middle ground. It doesn't leave either one of you feeling slighted, and then sometimes it needs to go her way and sometimes it needs to go his way. And that's okay too, but as long as you're voicing how you feel, and it's again, not sometimes what you say, but it's how you say it. So use all the tools that we've left you with. I know that we use it as well in our daily lives, and sometimes it can be a struggle, but if the more you use it, the easier they will become to actually do them first versus having to go back. Remember that if you say something, you can't take it back. You cannot take it back. And words sometimes hurt deeper than anything else. So we appreciate you tuning in to Unscripted. We ask that you take the time out now to go to our websites, to subscribe to us, to join us on anything else that we're doing in the future. It's also time that we continue to have these conversations that matter. So join us again next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Unscripted as we have conversations that matter. Thank you, Shannon, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I won't make it easy for you now. You got 2 minutes of my time, and I don't really break too easily, but I'm worth it, 'cause I'll slip into your dreams tonight. Oh.